If you would have told me that in the same year I would end up watching Battlefield Earth and Catwoman for the first time, I would have said, you are out of your goddamn mind and there is no way in hell that's ever happening. Yeah. Yeah, that definitely happened. I watched both of these movies for the first time in the same year. Hey everyone, it's Alexander, the real Mr. Robinson. Welcome to the channel. So Wonder Woman 1984 comes out on Christmas Day next week. I've already talked about Supergirl from 1984, but now we're going to jump ahead 20 years and talk about Catwoman from 2004, directed by Pitof, and stars Halle Berry as the title role in name only. The reason I say in name only is because Halle Berry is not playing Selina Kyle in this movie. You know, the famous Gotham City criminal who dresses like a cat and has an on and off relationship with Batman. No, instead Halle Berry is playing a graphics designer named Patience Phillips. She works at this beauty company and she's socially awkward. She's kind of pathetic in a way. She has an annoying best friend who is just horny 24/7. And one day, after she's trying to drop off some prints to meet a deadline, she stumbles across an evil plan involving this beauty cream. And she ends up getting caught, getting killed. But thanks to the power of a supernatural cat's breath, she is resurrected, has cat-like abilities, and takes on the name of Catwoman. It's as ridiculous as it sounds. No, actually, no, because that would imply that this movie's somewhat ridiculous. No, this movie is just... oh my god, this is another level of terrible. So last week, as I mentioned beforehand, I watched and reviewed Supergirl for the very first time. It's a terrible movie, but at the very least, it's better than Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. And then we get to Halle Berry's Catwoman, which... I think it's really no surprise at all that this movie's terrible, but it is really one of, if not the single worst comic book movies ever made. It is just really a special kind of bad. It's so inept, so mind-boggling at how terrible this could be. Except I think this might be, I don't know, because Battlefield Earth is just atrocious. But Catwoman, I feel like there's no excuse for how terrible it is. Because Battlefield Earth had a lot of financial issues that got them in trouble by the FBI, whereas Catwoman is backed up by a major movie studio, in a time when the comic book movie genre is really picking up steam, and it just makes this movie even more embarrassing when you think about it. Because if I'm going to go back to Supergirl's terrible, sure, but at the time, comic book movies were still new. Before Supergirl, there was only the first 3 Superman movies. Superman 3 is bad, but Superman 1 and 2 are fantastic. So with Supergirl, you could go, okay, it's bad, but the genre's still learning how to walk, so we'll give this one a slight pass. In between the 20-year gap of Supergirl and Catwoman, there have been many examples on how to make great comic book movies, to the point where it's down to a blueprint. Not only did you have Superman 1 and 2, but you also had Tim Burton's Batman. You had X-Men, X2, Spider-Man, and Spider-Man 2, which came out 3 weeks before Catwoman. So there's really no excuse for this being as terrible as it is. The fact that one of the single worst comic book movies ever made comes out weeks after a movie that's considered to be one of the greatest of the genre, I don't agree, but I still like it. That's embarrassing. Now, normally I don't like to do the whole, in the books they do this, and in the movies they do this type of criticism, because I just feel like it's never-ending and kind of nitpicky. Besides, a lot of comic book movies have made changes that actually work within the context of the movies. For example, the organic web shooters in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. Okay, gets bitten by a radioactive spider. It makes sense he has the ability to shoot webs without the mechanical web shooters. In Avengers Age of Ultron, Hank Pym didn't create Ultron, but by the time that movie came out, we weren't introduced to Hank Pym yet, so it makes sense for him to be created by Tony Stark and the Avengers, since in the comics he is one of the greatest Avengers villains. But Catwoman completely disregards the source material. Like I mentioned beforehand, Halle Berry is not playing Selina Kyle, but in addition to that, the movie doesn't even take place in Gotham City. They don't even specify where it takes place. Batman's not in it, which that aspect is actually the least of this movie's problems. They give her an absolutely ridiculous origin story where she's resurrected by this ancient cat, and she has literal cat-like superpowers and cat-like abilities to where she twitches her head like a cat, she lands on her feet, she eats cat food. It's ridiculous. Like, it's clear that this movie tried to be more like Spider-Man, the movies, not the books, rather than trying to be Catwoman. Because think about it. Like, all that ridiculous setup, the ridiculous origin that they give this character, and the ridiculous power set, Catwoman in the books is just a common thief. Like, she's immortal, she's just a criminal that dresses up like a cat, and the thing that makes her the most interesting, in my opinion, is her on and off relationship with Batman. How they have these arguments, but they also have this little romantic connection. And at the end of the day, Selina Kyle can be a criminal with a heart of gold. This movie is not that. It completely disregards the source material and is just... Again, you can't believe this movie is as bad as it is. The acting is straight up atrocious. Halle Berry is just very bizarre in her performance. Criticize her all you want for her performance as Storm in the X-Men movies, because I don't think she's terrible, but she's not the best actor in those movies. She is atrocious here. As Patience Phillips, she is just so pathetic and weak. She's pretty much playing Michelle Pfeiffer's Selina Kyle in Batman Returns. And once she actually becomes Catwoman, Halle Berry tries way too hard to be sexy to the point where it's actually a turnoff. And the costume, that costume right there is just so gratuitous, and honestly, it's a turnoff of a costume. Like, I look at that and go, wow, I don't know how you made something that's supposed to be sexy not look sexy. It takes a specific type of talent to make that possible. Everyone else in this movie is bad as well. Sharon Stone is awful in this movie, and she looks like she's high throughout this entire film. I really got some strong Uma Thurman, Poison Ivy vibes from her. Except it makes Poison Ivy and Batman and Robin not look too bad by comparison. Benjamin Bratt is the only one who actually seems to be trying, at least for the first 2/3 of the movie. By the time you get to the third act, he just gives up entirely. There's a moment in this movie where he gets shot in the shoulder, and he doesn't even try to pretend that he's in pain. He's just like, look, I regret being in this movie. I'm only here for the money, so let's just get the shot done so I can go home and get on with my life. Another thing that's absolutely atrocious with this movie is the editing. Usually when it comes to a movie that's terribly edited, I will usually cite Batman Begins as the prime example, mainly when it comes into action scenes. The editing in this movie puts Batman Begins to shame because it is so full of quick cuts, and even in dialogue scenes, there are way too many cuts for a short period of time. You remember when Bohemian Rhapsody came out 2 years ago, and there was that scene that went around the internet for a while showcasing the film's terrible Oscar-winning editing? Well, imagine that, but for an hour and 40 minutes. That's Catwoman's editing. Oh, and did I mention that people teleport in this movie? Yeah, and that doesn't have anything to do with superpowers. The movie's so terribly edited that people seem like they're teleporting. Benjamin Bratt will teleport from the street up to the 3rd story of a building to save Halle Berry. Halle Berry herself teleports from one floor to another in a jewelry store. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, and I mean that in the most sarcastic way possible. Another thing that's obnoxious is all the terrible CGI in this movie. I mean, there's the terrible CGI cat that breathes on Halle Berry to resurrect her, But then there's the terrible CGI to show Catwoman crawling all over the place, like up walls or on rooftops or in alleyways. Again, they wanted to try to replicate Spider-Man more than Catwoman. But they also do CGI establishing shots for the city. I don't think there's even one point in this movie that actually uses a real city as its backdrop. Everything is CGI, and the camera is just constantly flying throughout these CGI landscapes, as if you're soaring over California, or again, soaring over the world. And the most hilarious part about the CGI in this movie, outside the fact that it's atrocious, it's the fact that this movie costs $100 million, and I want to know where that money went, because this does not look like a movie that cost $100 million. Lord of the Rings: Return of the King came out 1 year prior to Catwoman, and that's a fantasy epic, and it cost $94 million to make, and you can tell where every cent of that budget went. There's really nothing else that can be said about Catwoman. It is just god awful. The only good thing to come out of Catwoman, and this is a pure backhanded compliment, is that Halle Berry actually showed up to the Razzie ceremony to accept her award in person for Worst Actress. And she also brought her Oscar that she won for Monsters Ball to that same ceremony as well, and gave an acceptance speech and everything, where she said, "I would like to thank Warner Brothers for putting me in this piece of shit god-awful movie." And that is one of the most awesome things I've ever seen an actor or actress do. What she did at the Razzie ceremony is the equivalent of Michael Caine saying this about Jaws the Revenge. I've never seen it, but by all accounts it's terrible. However, I have seen the house that it built, and it's terrific. I have absolute mad respect for actors who are very honest and straightforward about being in terrible movies. And Halle Berry's Razzie acceptance speech is just, it's so brilliant. Which is the polar opposite of Catwoman, because in addition to Worst Actress, this movie also won Worst Picture at the Razzies. I literally watched this movie for the first time right before doing this review, and the first thing I thought halfway through the movie, not even at the end, but halfway through the movie, is, man, I have mad respect for Batman vs. Superman and Green Lantern now, because Batman vs. Superman, I hate, but at least it looks good. At least it looks like a Batman and Superman movie. Green Lantern at least looks like a Green Lantern movie. Batman and Robin and Superman for the Quest for Peace are at least so terrible that they're enjoyable, and they're definitely a product of their time. Although I guess one could argue that Catwoman is a product of its time as well. The only other comic book movie that I think even comes close to being as bad as Catwoman is Josh Trank's Fantastic Four from 2015, which might be worse. I think Fantastic Four is probably worse because it's so recent. But that being said, Catwoman, I was going to say Burn in Hell, but the thing that's keeping me from saying Burn in Hell is that I was never angry watching Catwoman. With Josh Trank's Fantastic Four, I was angry. This movie left me more dumbfounded than angry, so I'm just going to say don't waste your money at all. It is god-awful. It's atrocious on all accounts, but it is a special kind of atrocious that if you're into terrible movies, then it's one that you cannot go without seeing. It's a special kind of bad to the point where if this movie was an actual person, it would take your brain out, throw it in the sewers, pee on it, rub it in some cat litter, and then put it back in your head. Like, it is... wow, is it a train wreck of a movie. And there you go, that's my review for Catwoman. Like I mentioned last week, I won't be reviewing Elektra because I wanted to focus on the DC female-led superhero movies. Thankfully, ever since Catwoman, the comic book genre in terms of female-led movies has really gotten better. And not just better, but great. Thanks to Wonder Woman, I really like Captain Marvel, and it's a movie that honestly gets better for me as time goes on. I thought Birds of Prey was a lot of fun and very cool. Black Widow is finally getting her own movie, and I am hyped beyond belief for Wonder Woman 1984. It's getting good reviews, so I'm even more excited to see it. Even if, once again, it's under abnormal circumstances. I would have loved to see this in IMAX theater, but theaters aren't open in LA. and I'm not risking my life to go see it in a theater. But until we get to Wonder Woman 1984, I want to hear what you guys think about Catwoman. If you've seen it, what did you think? Do you ever plan on seeing this movie if you haven't? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, leave a comment, support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until then, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there is only one